Whenever anyone talks about the scramble for Africa, it is a ritual to point out that two nations have never been colonized, Ethiopia and Liberia. One that mentions how Ethiopia fended off Italy from occupying it in the Battle of Ottawa, and sadly fell to Mussolini just before the Second World War. In this discussion, tiny Liberia is forgotten. Looking at a map of Africa, you might think, hey, Liberia is so small, it wasn't worth anyone's time to colonize it. Liberia is on the coast, and during this time, access to the ocean meant everything. Not to mention its natural resources of rubber and iron. No, my friend, the reason Europe never colonized Liberia wasn't because of its military or lack of opportunity. It was because someone else already had. America. If you are an American, you probably think, what? We never colonized any part of Africa? You are correct, discounting all of the people of Africa we tried to own, but we still colonized Liberia. We didn't bring them into the American empire as we did in Puerto Rico, the Philippines, or the native tribes. For me to explain why, let's go through some history. America's early relationship with the continent of Africa and the many kingdoms there was centered around slavery. For expansion, America looked west to the Great Plains, and even in East Asia, while other nations like the UK was taking over southern Africa. America was dealing with internal issues and reaping what it sowed. In the first half of the 19th century, the young USA was doing prep work for the Civil War. The battle came down to pro-slavery states and senators and individuals, and anti-slavery states and senators and individuals. We can't call those anti-slavery individuals, etc., abolitionists because they weren't all that. Many favored containing the disease of enslavement or slowly freeing enslaved people over time. So if not abolitionists, what were these people called? Preferably something that isn't an insult from the southern states? Colonizationists, not colonialists? I don't think. I don't know what these people were called, but why this name? During the many arguments around slavery, a question came up, what do you do with once enslaved free people? While the answer to us may seem simple, integrate them into America as free people, the answer was concerning to many back in the day. You see, there were fears that those free people would take all the jobs, or be lazy and drag on society. The paranoia was often conflicting, but it didn't matter. This argument swayed much of the voting public. If anti-slavery advocates wanted any political advancement, they would have to find an answer that would satisfy this argument. Some of America's greatest minds worked together to figure out what to do. Representative James Randolph and Representative Richard Henry Lee, both from Virginia, Justice Bushrod Washington of the Supreme Court, and lastly, Senator Henry Clay, a man called by future President Abraham Lincoln the ideal of a great man. These four and their allies worked together, bringing together their great minds to figure out what to do. Then one of them spoke. What if we take them and push them somewhere else? The best minds America has to offer, everyone. Instead of getting laughed out of high society, there was agreement, and thus the American Colonization Society was created. The question now for everyone is, where is that somewhere else? Well, America has all that empty territory to the west. That won't do. White people might go there, and the entire point was to remove the issue from American sovereignty. The ACS wasn't as united as you might think. While it was dominated by anti-slavery advocates, some just wanted to remove freed blacks because they worried that their existence in the US might encourage slave rebellions. So no America and no Haiti. In the first meeting of the society, it was decided Africa would be the place. To connect this whole thing back to the topic I was supposed to be talking about this entire time. I really hope no one figures out that I'm just talking about American history at this point. Thus, the goal of the ACS was to send free blacks to Africa, have them establish a colony there that was successful and could be where future formerly enslaved people could join them. Maybe while they're there, they could patrol their coast, stopping the now illegal Atlantic slave trade. Oh, also maybe spread Christianity. Now all that was needed was a piece of Africa for the society to set up as a colony. They sent out in 1821 Lieutenant Robert F. Stockton and Dr. Eli Ayers on the USS Alligator to get them that land. Stockton was a huge anti-slavery man, having been the first to crack down on the Atlantic slave trade, and could be trusted to deal fairly and in good faith with the kings of Africa. The Alligator landed in the land of Zulu Duma, also known as King Peter, on Cape Mesurado, or today Montesardo County. The negotiations were good at first. King Peter was willing to relinquish part of his territory in exchange for money. Then, according to Stockton, something peculiar happened. Upon learning of the goal to hammer the slave trade, Peter ordered his men to aim their weapons at Stockton and Ayers. With Stockton then pulling his pistol on Zulu Duma, Stockton gave a speech about how God willed the formation of this colony, and if he were to die, it would be the first blow in a holy war. Yeah, I don't buy that this is how it went down. Leaving Stockton's vision, King Peter and 6 of his nobles signed a treaty at gunpoint, handing over the Cape to Stockton and the ACS. Now with the land handed over in an illegal treaty, the society got to work, transporting away their political problems. I mean, rescuing freed people of color from the racist world of the American continent. Upon arrival with a much lower population than they started with, thanks to malaria, the people got to work, creating the capital, Monrovia, which is still the capital today. Life in Monrovia and its surrounding area was hard. The supplies promised weren't fully stocked. Disease ravaged the populace, and oh yeah, the king threatened at gunpoint didn't just allow this to happen. In the ACS's most extraordinary hubris, they didn't think dropping a bunch of foreigners in a kingdom would lead to problems because they had the same skin color. I would call that the dumbest thing that has happened in this script, but let's be honest, sadly, it isn't. Things weren't working out, but this wouldn't stop Stockton. Well, it would. He was replaced by Yehudi Ashram, now isn't that a name, who followed in the footsteps of Stockton, forcing land secessions at gunpoint, even again to King Peter. By 1826, much of modern-day Liberia was in the hands of the ACS. Well, I say ACS, but the American Colonization Society wasn't one thing. It was many things all together in a trench coat to be a political force. But in actuality, it was a bunch of state branches and therefore state settlements all across the African kingdom. So that meant that no group was sharing when it came to supplies, food, and weapons. When the Mississippi contingent was further colonizing, the most significant contingent, the Maryland one, was doing its own thing. And to make matters worse, the population influx was sporadic and minor. It seems the most significant arrival was of 300 free slaves to Monrovia. And even when King Peter died in the late 1820s, the next king, who was called Prince Peter, but became king, so would be called King Peter. This is all too confusing. So King Prince Peter continued to attack the colonies/invaders of his territory. And he wasn't alone. Other nations, like the Grebu and crew, joined in. And not everyone speaks the same language, formerly enslaved people who had spent decades or their entire lives in America had forgotten their ancestral tongue. Not every African kingdom has the same language, even if they haven't. Who thought this was a good idea? All right, a bunch of powerful and wealthy aristocrats who never really cared about these people anyways. So it's no wonder that of the 4,571 people sent to the sporadic settlement that dotted the Liberian coast, only 40% would survive. But that didn't stop anyone. Again, it's not like the ACS really cared about these people. So more and more people were sent. To quote Professor Tom W. Schick, I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
The organization continued to send people to Liberia, while very much aware of the chances for survival. The organizers of the ACS considered themselves to be humanitarians performing the work of God. This attitude prevented them from accepting certain realities of their crusade. Any problems, including those of disease and death, were viewed as the trials and tribulations that God provided as a means of testing the fortitude of man.
In 1832, another war was had between the colonists of Liberia and a combined union of 2 indigenous nations. The people of Monrovia won, and here wheels started turning. So far, we had an assortment of settlements owned by societies back in America, one step from the total death of all those residing in those settlements. Furthermore, public favor was changing back in the US. The writings of William Lloyd Garrison and speeches of Frederick Douglass started to discourage colonization. Though it was still popular, it was on the way out. Sooner or later, the colonies of Liberia would be without decentralized leadership, and the independence of them was approaching. Joseph Jenkins Robert was a well educated man and successful businessman who, with his family, emigrated to the Liberian colonies. He worked as the sheriff of the colonies, working with indigenous kingdoms, either peacefully or forcefully, extracting tax from them, and keeping the peace in the seemingly doomed colony. In 1839, he was appointed vice governor of the colonies, and in 1841, on the death of the former governor, became the first African American governor. 5 years later, he called for independence from the ACS. After a referendum in 1847, with approval from the ACS, Liberia was declared independent, having its own Declaration of Independence. It borrowed heavily from the USA's Declaration of Independence.
We recognize in all men certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the right to acquire, possess, enjoy, and defend property.
Robert was elected president in 1848 and didn't set out to earn recognition from his neighbors. He traveled to Queen Victoria immediately. He got her recognition in 1848. France recognized Liberia shortly after in 1849 or 1852. The German and Italian states followed. Though the Commonwealth wasn't complete yet, Maryland's colony held out. Being the biggest and the strongest, it thought it could go on its own. In 1856, after being defeated by an indigenous army, it conceded it couldn't and joined newfound Liberia. With that, the nation moved further inland, converting, capturing, and culling those already living there. Surprisingly, the fledgling nation survived and thrived. Agriculture and trade bloomed, and infrastructure like hospitals and colleges were constructed. Sadly, all this was built off of a caste system with indigenous citizens at the very bottom. Still, for a nation of its day, it was prosperous. The nation was forced to cede some of its territorial claims to Britain and France during the scramble for Africa. Still, from my research, no attempt was ever made to fully take over the land. It did go through flawed elections and its economy declined, but so happens to almost every nation. So why wasn't Liberia colonized? Because it had no good excuse to be colonized. It was the country that all the other empires were claiming to create in Africa. It was a strong nation with terrible beginnings. If you ever look at a map of late 19th century Africa and see little Liberia sticking out, remember, Henry Clay is an idiot.
Thanks everyone for watching, and if you didn't know, this video is part of the South of the Sahara project, where a bunch of history tubers got together to talk about history of Africa that's south of the Sahara. Please check out the rest of the playlist, as there's beautiful animation, great storytelling, and a lot to learn. And if you're so inclined, tell them that I sent you. So they are confused, as they forgot that I was part of the project, I'm pretty sure, for the last minute.